My name is Grace Mitchell, and if you're listening to this, I want you to remember one thing. Life has a cruel way of teaching lessons you never asked to learn. I grew up in a neighborhood where broken dreams were more common than paved sidewalks. My father died when I was a little girl, leaving my mom to raise me and my younger brother on nothing but late paychecks and hope. She used to tell me, "Grace, you'll rise above this. You'll have the life I never could." And I believed her. By the time I was 22, I landed an internship at one of the biggest companies in the city. That was where everything changed. I remember my first day like it was yesterday, nervous, clutching a stack of files, trying not to trip over my own shoes. And then he stepped into the elevator. Jonathan Blake. Tall, confident, the kind of man who looked like he had the whole world in his back pocket. He glanced at me just once and asked, "New here?" I managed to stammer out a yes. He smiled, a smile that made the air catch in my throat, and said, "Welcome. You'll do fine." I didn't know it then, but that smile would both build me and break me. Jonathan wasn't just the CEO. He was the CEO. Respected, feared, admired. And yet, to my surprise, he noticed me. At first, it was small things, compliments on my work, asking me to stay a little late, offering me rides home. People whispered in the office, their laughter following me down hallways, but I ignored them. I told myself they were jealous. That what Jonathan and I had was real. One night, after hours of preparing a presentation together, he walked me to the parking lot. The city lights glowed in his eyes as he handed me my coat. "You're different from the others," he said softly. My heart raced. Different how? I asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You see things others don't. You feel things others ignore. That's rare." It was in that moment I fell for him completely. A year later, Jonathan proposed. Not in front of cameras or with a diamond ring the size of a golf ball, but in the quiet of his penthouse, just him and me. "I don't care what people think," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "You're the one I want." Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. For the first time in my life, I believed my fairy tale had come true. Our wedding was small. Jonathan said he didn't want media attention, and I thought that was romantic. Just a few colleagues, my mom, and my brother stood with me. I remember thinking, this is it. This is happiness. For a while, I lived in a dream. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, gifts I never imagined owning. I woke up next to him and felt like the luckiest woman alive. But dreams don't last forever. The first cracks appeared quietly. He started coming home late, his shirt faintly carrying a perfume that wasn't mine. His phone was always face down locked. He stopped holding me at night, stopped looking at me like I was his world. When I asked, he laughed, brushed it off, told me I was being paranoid. And because I loved him, because I wanted to believe in us, I forced myself to accept his words. One evening, my mom came over. She saw the shadows under my eyes, the way I forced my smile, and she knew. "What's wrong, Grace?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Nothing, Mom. He loves me. He chose me." She placed her hand on mine and whispered, "A woman knows when something is wrong. Don't ignore the signs. Men in power think they can get away with anything." I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to believe Jonathan was still the man who had once looked at me like I was the only one in the world. And for a little while, things seemed normal again. He surprised me with a trip, made me laugh again, kissed me the way he used to. I told myself I'd been foolish to doubt him. I told myself the storm had passed. But deep inside, something gnawed at me. A voice I couldn't silence, whispering that the worst was yet to come. And I should have listened. Because the day I discovered the truth, my entire world shattered into pieces I could never put back together. I remember the exact night my world crumbled. It was a Thursday, one of those evenings where the city outside our window buzzed with life, but our apartment was silent. Jonathan had texted me earlier, saying he'd be working late. I tried to convince myself it was normal. He was a CEO, after all, and CEOs worked late. But something in my chest wouldn't let me rest. I paced the living room, staring at the clock as minutes turned into hours. At 11, I tried calling him. No answer. At midnight, I tried again. Straight to voicemail. By 1 in the morning, I couldn't take it anymore. My gut screamed at me, louder than it ever had before. I grabbed my coat, stepped out into the cold night, and hailed a cab. His office tower wasn't far. As we pulled up, I saw his car in the parking lot, so I knew he was still there. My heart pounded as I entered the building, the security guard greeting me with a polite nod, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened to his floor, the lights were dim, but I could hear laughter coming from his office. A woman's laughter. High-pitched, playful, unmistakable. My stomach dropped. I moved slowly, almost against my will, until I reached the door. It was cracked open just enough for me to see, and what I saw burned itself into my memory forever. Jonathan was sitting on the edge of his desk, his tie loosened, his hands on a woman's waist. She was perched in his lap, her dress hiked up, her lips pressed against his neck. He laughed, the same deep laugh that once made me melt, but now it cut me open like a blade. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe if I blinked hard enough, the image would disappear. But it didn't. It was real. My husband, the man who swore he loved me, was with someone else. The woman whispered something in his ear, and he tilted his head back, grinning. "You're so much more exciting than my wife," he said. My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled back, covering my mouth to keep from making a sound. My whole body shook, rage and heartbreak colliding inside me. I wanted to burst in, scream, claw, demand answers. But I didn't. Something inside me told me to stay quiet, to watch, to remember every detail. And I did. I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the street, tears blurred my vision. I hailed another cab, collapsed into the seat, and cried silently as the city lights smeared past the window. When I got home, I sat on the floor of our bedroom, staring at the wedding photo on the nightstand. There we were, Jonathan and me, smiling, holding hands, promising forever. I wanted to smash the frame, but instead, I just stared, hollow-numb. The next morning, he came home like nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead, mumbled something about working late, and went straight to the shower. I watched him, every move, every gesture, and all I could hear in my head was his voice from the night before. "You're so much more exciting than my wife." That was the day I stopped being naive. That was the day the fairy tale ended. The first weeks after I discovered Jonathan with her felt like living underwater. Everything was muffled, colors faded, sounds distorted. I moved through the house like a ghost, going through the motions, making coffee, answering emails, putting on a face. While inside a storm of shame, fury, and raw, aching grief tore me apart. Friends called, my mother called, people asked if I was okay, and I lied to all of them. I told them I was tired, stressed, working hard. The truth was heavier than any lie I could speak aloud. The man I had trusted had humiliated me, and the world felt suddenly very small and very cold. The first few nights I wanted nothing more than to destroy everything he loved. I fantasized about ripping up his suits, burning his contracts, whispering his secrets into the ears of people who would make him pay. I imagined the dramatic revenge scenes my anger wanted. Public humiliation, scandal, a viral mess that would strip him of his reputation and his money. But the raw, animal part of me that wanted to lash out was clashing with another part, quieter but steadier. The part of my mother that had taught me to survive by thinking, not by breaking. So I sat, and I listened to myself breathe. I let the anger simmer instead of letting it explode. And when the initial heat cooled just enough for reason to slip back in, I began to plan. Not because I wanted to be petty. Not because I wanted to be vindictive for the fun of it. Because I realized the only real power I had left was to remake myself into something that could not be dismissed, ignored, or trampled on. The world would respect strength. It would listen to success. And that's how I could make him feel what I'd felt. Small and insignificant next to someone he'd underestimated. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, the city lights flickering through the blinds, thinking about the storm I was about to unleash. Months of research, planning, and careful observation had led to this moment. Jonathan thought the worst was behind him when the board restricted his powers, and the press turned its eyes elsewhere. He believed the fire had cooled, that I had shown my hand and was finished. But he didn't realize that everything so far had been the warm-up. The real game was just beginning. Jonathan thrived on control. He needed every eye in the room, every hand to shake, every praise to affirm his dominance. So I didn't just want to strip him of his career. I wanted to shatter the very image he had built of himself. I started quietly, contacting Richard Hawthorne, one of Jonathan's biggest investors. Richard was wealthy, yes, but cautious and precise. Jonathan had promised him massive returns on a secretive overseas deal. I laid out the evidence of fraud. Money funneled into shell companies, disguised as consulting fees. Richard's face paled as he read. "Do you know what this means for me?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. "But do you know what it means for Jonathan?" Richard began pulling his funds quietly, and one investor's exit triggered a cascade. Suddenly, projects Jonathan claimed as untouchable were hemorrhaging cash. Then I moved to his social world. Jonathan loved charity galas, the spotlight, the glossy magazines. I used contacts to expose that his donations were anything but charitable. They were funneled from company budgets. Donors withdrew, events rescinded invitations, magazines stopped featuring him. The man who once commanded attention now faced whispers and avoidance. At the same time, I dismantled his empire from within. I had discovered his secret slush fund months before. Carefully, I leaked the details to auditors just before a crucial shareholder meeting. By the time Jonathan entered the boardroom, every director had the documents in hand. They saw a liability, not a visionary. That meeting ended with his suspension pending investigation. When he stormed into the apartment that night, his face twisted with fury. "You did this," he shouted. I remained calm. "No, Jonathan. You did this to yourself." He tried to threaten me, reminding me of the lifestyle he had given me, the name, the wealth. But I wasn't afraid. I remembered the night I caught him with her, the betrayal, the humiliation. That memory fueled me, sharper than any fear he could summon. I saved the most damning evidence for last. Proof Jonathan had been laundering money through offshore accounts. Complicated, messy, undeniable. I handed it to regulators, and the news broke like thunder. CEO Jonathan Blake under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. His empire crumbled overnight, his reputation destroyed. I didn't stop there. Jonathan had surrounded himself with admirers, women he thought he could control. I reached out to them, not to shame, but to reveal the truth. Some corroborated Elena's testimony, painting an even darker picture of the man behind the suit. Now the narrative shifted, from fallen CEO to predator in power. Jonathan called me repeatedly, desperation in every word. "Grace, we can fix this. I just need you to stop." But there was nothing to fix. His life was over, and I wasn't stopping. The final act was personal. The divorce filings detailed every betrayal, financial manipulation, and affair. The documents became public record. Journalists dissected every line, and Jonathan's name was dragged through headlines across the country. The day the court finalized the divorce, I walked out of the courthouse with my head high. Jonathan sat slumped on a bench, eyes hollow, suit wrinkled, dignity shattered. He was no longer a king. He was a man alone in the ruins of his own making. And me? I was free. The city felt different after that, brighter somehow. I poured myself into my work, my consultancy, and my friendships. I traveled, met inspiring people, and rediscovered parts of myself buried under heartbreak. I began mentoring young women entering corporate worlds dominated by people like Jonathan, teaching them to recognize manipulation, protect their worth, and rise with integrity. Every success, every small triumph, felt like reclaiming the life he had tried to steal. Sometimes late at night, I remembered his face the day he lost control. I didn't gloat, I just remembered, a quiet lesson carved into my memory. People who betray rarely live comfortably in their lies. Karma finds a way always. I also learned a deeper truth. Love doesn't justify blind trust. I had loved Jonathan with everything I had, but love alone cannot erase deceit, greed, or cruelty. That understanding gave me power, not over him, but over myself. I walked past his former office building months later. The lobby was empty, sterile, almost unreal. I smiled faintly, remembering the nights I had spent planning, the hours I had poured into understanding the man I once married. The victory wasn't in his downfall, it was in my rise. I had turned pain into purpose, betrayal into strategy, heartbreak into resilience. People ask me if I forgive him. I don't. Not because I want to punish him forever, but because forgiveness would erase the lessons, and I needed to remember. I live in the life I built afterward. A life where I am respected, my voice carries weight, where I sleep without fear or shame. A life defined by me, not the man who tried to diminish me. In the end, Jonathan Blake taught me the most important lesson of all. Strength isn't about dominance, it's about resilience. It's standing up, planning carefully, and ensuring justice finds its way. I am Grace Mitchell. I survived betrayal, outsmarted a man who thought he was untouchable, and reclaimed my life. And that, the sweetest victory of all, is mine.